Hi guys! Today I'm going to be reading chapter 13 from the Toothpaste Millionaire. And before I start reading, I wanted to read the trivia question. So the K2 question is, who has been polishing the tube filling machine every day? And then the grades 3 through 5 question is, what is located at 29 Cuyahoga Avenue? So I'm going to read chapter 13, be thinking about those questions. Chapter 13, Hector and the Happy Lips Plant. The amazing thing about the tube filling machine was that it looked so much the way Rufus had imagined it would look. I showed Hector Rufus's drawing. Hector seemed to understand it right away. He'd need a gear wheel here and a 2-inch pipe feeding in here, Hector said. The pressure chamber wouldn't have to be so big, but he's got the right idea. The tube filling machine was the biggest piece of equipment in the plant. Then there was the conveyor belts that carried the tubes to tables where they could be packaged for shipping. And there were storage bins for the stuff Happy Lips had used to make lip lotion. As the plant had looked run down from the outside, I was surprised at how neat everything was inside. The floors were swept, the tube filling machine looked as if someone had been polishing it every day. Hector said that when the company went bankrupt, it usually sold all of its equipment to help pay its bills. But the Happy Lips company owed the owner of the building so much rent that they had to leave him the tube filling machine in place of the rent. The owner thought it might be easier to rent the plant with all that good equipment in it, but the place had been empty for 6 months, and the owner, Hector said, was talking now about ripping out the tube filling machine and selling it for scrap metal. That would be a crime, Hector said, to destroy a beautiful machine like that. It would be a waste. Hector's like Rufus about not wanting to waste anything. Machines don't usually send me, but I could see how Hector felt about this one. It reminded me a little bit of that big piece of sculpture the Cleveland Museum had in its entranceway the last time I was there. The reason the tube filling machine was in such a beautiful condition was that Hector had a key to the place. He had come by a couple times a week to see if the machine needed oiling or anything. Hector wanted it to be in perfect condition, ready to go on a day's notice in case somebody came along to rent the place. The owner of the building was paying Hector a little to keep an eye on the plant, but Hector said it wasn't enough to live on, as he has 5 kids. He was almost broke, and his wife was bugging him to go into some other line of work. I tell her that would be a waste, he said, being I'm such a good mechanic. I know more about that machine than any mechanic in the United States, on account of having practically built it and made a lot of improvements on it. If your friend rented the place and hired me to look after this machinery, Hector said, we could be in full production tomorrow, no problem. I could picture it. The tube machine filled with toothpaste, humming away, squeezing out thousands of tubes of toothpaste every hour. Hector working the machine, and Rufus and I and the other stockholders packing toothpaste and mailing it out to customers all over the United States. I couldn't wait to get home and tell Rufus. Hector said, I think the rent's only about $300 a month. Rent, I said. Oh, that brought me down to earth. $300 seemed like a lot. Of course, I realized you couldn't expect to get a factory with machinery in it for nothing. And you certainly couldn't fit a machine like that into our laundry room. Then there was Hector, too. I didn't think we could run that machine without him. And Rufus couldn't ask Hector to work like his friends for a share of the profits at the end of the year. Not when he was broke and had 5 kids to feed. And how much would you cost, Hector? I asked. I was getting $9,000 from Happy Lips, Hector said. I gotta make at least $9,000 a year to pay my bills. So that would be $9,000 plus rent. That might be okay if Rufus already had profits from the first year being in business. But of course he didn't. Then again, if Rufus could figure out a plan for making millions, maybe he could think of some way to get only a few $1,000s. I told Hector I would have to talk it over with my friend. You bring him here, he said. I'll show him how everything works. I said I'd bring Rufus the next day. Just one question, Hector said as I was getting on my bike, about Mr. Rufus. Would he discriminate? What do you mean? I asked. I mean about hiring me, Hector said, on the account of I'm black. Oh, I said, well, Rufus is too. He is? Hector said. More and more people you meet are, I said. I guess you're right, he said. Well, I'm glad to have met you too. Riding home, I didn't know whether I'd done the right thing or not going down to 29 Cuyahoga Avenue. I began to worry that maybe I'd gotten Hector's hopes up too much. My father's always saying that one thing leads to another. It certainly does. I start out to buy a friend a birthday present and end up trying to get him a factory to go with it and find a job for a man with 5 kids. I never had that kind of problem in Fairhaven, Connecticut. And that is the end of chapter 13.